Exactly at 1 o'clock, a giant artillery barrage intended to soften up the Union defenses before the attack began with a deafening explosion. Meade had just left his commanders finishing their lunch. As an orderly served them butter, a shell tore the man in two.
The storm broke upon us so suddenly that numbers of soldiers and officers who leaped from their tents or lazy siestas on the grass were stricken in their rising with mortal wounds and died, some with cigars clamped between their teeth, some with pieces of food in their fingers.
The flying iron and pieces of stone struck some men down in every direction. About 30 men of our brigade were killed or wounded. Elijah Hunt Rhodes.
To keep up his men's courage, General Winfield Scott Hancock rode up and down the line without flinching at the screaming shells. A brigadier urged him to take cover. Hancock refused. There are times, he answered, when a corps commander's life does not count. Union artillery began to fire back.
We sat and heard in silence. What other expression had we that was not mean for such an awful universe of battle? All in the rear of the crest for 1,000 yards was the field of the shell's blind fury. Ambulances passing down the Tarrytown Road with wounded men were struck. The hospitals were riddled. Frank Haskell.
Suddenly, the Union guns fell silent to conserve ammunition for the attack Meade was sure was coming, and to lure the enemy out into the open fields. It worked. At about 2 o'clock, Pickett asked if his men should go forward. Longstreet, convinced the charge was folly, unable to bring himself to speak, only nodded.
If you stop to think about it, it would have been much harder not to go than to go. It would have taken a great deal of courage to say, Marse Robert, I ain't going. Nobody's got that much courage.
Now Pickett gave the order. Up, men, and to your posts. Don't forget today that you are from Old Virginia. At 3 o'clock, 3 divisions, 13,000 men, started out of the woods toward the stone wall 1.5 miles away at a brisk, steady pace, covering about 100 yards a minute. They were silent as they marched, forbidden this time to fire or even to give the rebel yell until they were on top of the enemy.
More than half a mile their front extends, man touching man, rank pressing rank. The red flags wave, their horsemen gallop up and down. The arms of 13,000 men, barrel and bayonet, gleam in the sun. A sloping forest of flashing steel. Right on they move, as with one soul. None on that crest now need be told. The enemy is advancing. Every eye could see his legions, an overwhelming, resistless tide, an ocean of armed men sweeping upon us. All was orderly and still upon our crest, no noise and no confusion. General Gibbon rode down the lines, cool and calm, and in an unimpassioned voice, he said to the men, "Do not hurry, men, and fire too fast. Let them come up close before you fire, and then aim slow."
It was, a Union colonel recalled, the most beautiful thing I ever saw. Suddenly, the Union artillery on Cemetery Ridge and Little Round Top opened fire, and a great moan went up from the Confederate line. We could not help hitting them at every shot, a Federal officer recalled. As many as 10 men at a time were destroyed by a single bursting shell. A Confederate lieutenant cried out to his men, "Home, boys, home. Remember, home is over beyond those hills." The waiting Union troops began chanting, "Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg." first Southerners came within 200 yards, Union General Alexander Hayes told his men to fire. 11 cannon and 1,700 muskets went off at once. Entire regiments disappeared.
The rebel lines were at once enveloped in a dense cloud of dust. Arms, heads, blankets, guns, and knapsacks were tossed into the clear air.
Still, the Confederates came on. They reached the Union line at one place only, a crook in the stone wall known as the Angle.
Seconds are centuries, minutes, ages. Men fire into each other's faces not 5 feet apart. There are bayonet thrusts, saber strokes, pistol shots, men going down on their hands and knees, spinning round like tops, throwing out their arms, gulping blood, falling, legless, armless, headless. There are ghastly heaps of dead men.
Foot to foot, body to body, and man to man, they struggled and pushed and strived and killed. The mass of wounded and heaps of dead tangled their feet. And underneath the trampling mass, wounded men who could no longer stand fought, drowned in sweat, black with powder, red with blood.
The Confederates were led by General Lewis A. Armstead. He stepped over the wall waving his hat on his sword and seized a Union battery before he was shot down. All the Confederates who breached the wall were killed or captured. The Union line held. Pickett's charge had failed. Lee's army would never again penetrate so far into Northern Territory.
Cheer after cheer rose from the triumphant boys in blue, echoing from Round Top, from Cemetery Hill, resounding in the vale below, and making the very heavens throb. Private Jesse Young.
As the rebels staggered back, Lee rode out to meet them. "All this has been my fault," he told them.